Great. A lovely evening to everyone. Welcome to the JGF debates. My name is Zolani Metu. I work as a program manager within the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship. So today we're really here to debate whether or not online learning will play a key role in addressing inequality within the South African education system. Now, one of the key competencies that we're trying to develop within the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship is what we call engaging for impact. What this means really is that we are hoping that our candidate fellows, once they become expert teachers, educational leaders, and social entrepreneurs, will present themselves as people that are able to articulate their arguments, that are able to build arguments, that are able to critically engage with subjects, and that are also able to demonstrate a level of empathy when attending to any social, economic, or political issues that they might find themselves confronted with. So earlier on, we had Simone to come and really train our candidate fellows on public speaking and the sort of nuances that go into public engagements. Now, this debate really lands at the perfect time for the candidate fellows to demonstrate that skill, right? To showcase what their capability is with regards to, engaging with educational challenges. So the topic for today's debate is this House believes that online learning will play a key role in addressing inequality within South African education. This House believes that online learning will play a key role in addressing inequality within the South African education system. Now, to help us adjudicate this debate, we've got two attorneys that have really, graciously availed themselves to come and be adjudicators for the debate. One of whom is Nonkululeko Zondo, who is basically an associate at Bowman's law firm. Now, these two adjudicators are not really here to determine a winner, but to really assess the way in which the candidate fellows engage with the topic that I've described as I entered into this conversation. So Nonkululeko is going to be one of these adjudicators and will be joined by Ngcebo Mabizela, who's also a lawyer. Ngcebo is an in-house corporate legal counsel at the V&A Waterfront. Really, join me in welcoming our adjudicators, and thank you so much, Ngcebo and Nonkululeko, for availing your time this evening. I mean, I think people can imagine what things you'd like to do on a Friday evening rather than sitting and adjudicating a debate. But I think you've availed your time, and we're really grateful for that. Now, before I move on to introducing our speakers, I'd really like to talk to you around some of the ground rules or, the process that is going to govern today's debate. So all speakers have about 6 minutes to conclude their speeches. I'm going to share a timer while the speakers are speaking. They've been trained to know exactly when protected time ends. What I mean by protected time is that the first 2 minutes of the candidate fellows' speeches are protected, meaning none of the other speakers can ask them or point of information. The speakers will be referring to one another as members of the House. That means only the speakers are members of the House. So if you're not a speaker, you may not at any point speak during the debate. There will be an opportunity for engagement at the end of the debate. So please, if you have questions for any of the speakers while they're speaking, please do not ask them. Write your question down for up until the end of the debate. From 2 minutes up until 5 minutes of the speeches, any of the members of the House may ask a speaker a point of information, a point of clarity, and I will notice whoever wants to ask a point of information. The speakers have also been advised that should they want to ask a point of information, they need to use the reactions button on Zoom and raise their hand. And I'll then notice a hand that has been raised. And a speaker will need to confirm whether or not they accept or they decline the point of information. While we're doing the sort of engagement at the end of the debate, the two adjudicators will go into a breakaway session where they'll be deliberating and come back to give us some feedback on what they've observed in the course of the debate. Now, who are our debaters today? In opening government, we have Spiwo and Christian. And Spiwo will be the Prime Minister and Christian being the Deputy Prime Minister, or the speakers will confirm if there's been any change in terms of the exact role. In opening opposition, we have Jasmina and Olamzi, with Jasmina as the leader of opposition and Olamzi as the deputy leader of opposition. In closing government, we have Agisang and Sibulele, with Agisang as the member of government and Sibulele as government whip. In closing opposition, we have Mulemo and Tina, and Mulemo being the member of opposition and Tina being opposition whip. I think the speakers have indicated that there's been a switch, and we'll see the switches as the speeches proceed. Now, without wasting any time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and share the timer with you so that yourself and the speakers can actually see what the time looks like. Are you able to see my screen? Okay. Great. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, Zolani, we can see it.
Yep. Whoa.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Without wasting much time, I'd like to call on the Prime Minister of Government to open their case.
I will be going first. Thank you, Zolani. Can I start?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Greetings to you, Chairperson, the adjudicators, as well as the members of the House at large. I am Spiwe Mnisi, and today I have been tasked with the responsibility of being the Prime Minister for this debate. However, I'm not alone. I'm going with Christian Mueller, who is currently tasked with the responsibility as the Deputy Prime Minister. Now, Chairperson, for the next few minutes, I will actually fulfill three roles. Firstly, I will set out and define the purpose of today's debate. Secondly, I will put forward our position and case as the opening government. And last but not least, I will give you at least two reasons why the case that we are going to put forward should stand and must be implemented in South Africa without delay. Now, Chairperson, the students of South Africa are currently being disadvantaged. First of all, the existing education system is disadvantaging the poorest students of them all, which at the end of the day perpetuates inequality in South Africa. The current education system, Chairperson, is characterized by, first of all, a laggard industrial revolution, meaning we are still stuck in the first style of industrial teaching. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is moving towards the fourth industrial revolution to create workers of the future. Secondly, the current education system is characterized by, first of all, a crumbling infrastructure. Secondly, most of the teachers in rural areas have a high number of absenteeism. Thirdly, we can see that the current education system is also characterized by poor sanitation in those schools. At the end of the day, the result of it all is a poor education delivery for the students of South Africa. Now, this is not shocking considering the fact that South Africa is actually ranked the second towards the end country to deliver quality education to its students worldwide. Now, Chairperson, I am going to put forward the motion of today's debate as the opening government. So this is what we believe. We believe that online learning will play a key role in addressing the inequality which exists in South Africa. Now, before I move forward, allow me to clarify these three terms. Every time you hear us speaking of online learning, we are referring to any training that is delivered through a digital device. And when you hear us speaking of inequality, Chairperson, we are referring to the imbalance of the distribution of equal opportunities to all learners in South Africa. And last but not least, an education system is basically anything that goes towards providing quality education to all our learners in South Africa. Now, with 27 years into a democratic South Africa, Chairperson, we are still struggling to meet the gap between the poor and those who can actually afford quality education. So this simply means that if it's still taking us more than 27 years to address these issues, then there is a problem with our current education system. So now what are we proposing as the opening government? As we have heard, if you were present during the earlier speeches, we heard from Robert Paddock, who is from the University of Cape Town, who highlighted that any complex education system basically results in inefficiencies. That is why we believe the current education system is inefficient due to its complexity. Therefore, as the opening government, we proposed that the state government should focus its resources, research and development, and human capital into establishing online learning for all students in South Africa. And why are we saying that, Chairperson? The first reason is this: the advantages that come with online learning is that students, regardless of you being in a rural area, a township, or even a developed industrial area, you can be able to access teachers all over the world. So if we have the best teacher in mathematics who is currently residing in Johannesburg, it is possible for a learner in the Eastern Cape to be able to have access to that teacher at the end of the day, providing a good quality education and good marks. The second reason that I want to put on the table for you, Chairperson, is the matter of the Industrial Revolution. Now, a lot of people, and especially in the education industry, they are still stuck in the first style of teaching. And the problem with that is we are not moving towards the age of robotics. In today's day and age, Chairperson.
You accepted?
Yes, I accept, Chairperson.
Prime Minister, I must ask you, when you say that you want the government to implement online learning for all students in South Africa, are you suggesting that we implement this over the current education system completely?
Certainly not. As I have put in my motion, that online learning plays a key in developing the current education system. So that is why I just want to highlight that introducing online learning for the rural areas will benefit them as well. Now, as I continue with my last point, Chairperson, before I run out of time, is the mere fact that the Industrial Revolution as a whole is an era which requires employees to be able to work in consensus with robotics. So as robotics are able to perform the functions of the first and second industrial revolution in making things in simple English, we as teachers have the responsibility of creating creative learners who will bring an element of creativity into the classroom. Now, Chairperson, this is basically why we believe as the opening government that we should indeed bring in online education into the education space to mitigate this inequality that exists in South Africa. Thank you.
Great. We thank the government Prime Minister, and without wasting much time, I'd like to call on the Leader of Opposition to open their case.
Members of the House, in a country that is known to be one of the most unequal states in the world, in a country where so many grade 4 learners are unable to read for meaning in their home language, and in a country that is in dire need for educational reform, in a country like South Africa, we need to look at the layers of inequality that plague the educational systems, and we need to look at how best to tackle them. That's why today's debate is important, members of the House. However, the argument presented by the government and the Prime Minister's speech says that online learning is beneficial and actively targets the inequalities that we are all very aware of that exist in the educational system. But we're here to tell you as the opposition that this is just not true. We are clashing on the grounds that firstly, online learning is ineffective in targeting the nuanced and layered existence of inequalities in South Africa. And secondly, it is actively harmful as it exacerbates the existing inequalities in South Africa, right? Now, before I explain how it is both ineffective and harmful, I'm just going to deal with a bit of rebuttal. So firstly, the Prime Minister began their speech saying that the education system is indeed flawed and it is very limited, and we have schools that are lacking access to resources. And as a side opposition, we are here to say, yes, we definitely understand the nature of inequality in South Africa, and we are glad that side government is giving us a context that we can work within. They also mentioned that it has been 27 years since the beginning of our democracy, and the fact that our education system hasn't really created a lot of equality is proof that we need to move forward. However, we're here to tell you that the fact that we haven't made any development is proof that inequality is such a big issue, and that online learning is not enough and is an ineffective tool to address such. So, first thing that I'm going to talk about in my speech is the nature of online learning, right? So what does online learning require? Firstly, it requires electricity. It also requires data for internet access. It requires internet access. It requires technological devices like cell phones and computers. And it also requires a space that is conducive to learning. Now, when learners are at home every single day, not going to school because of the pandemic like we have right now, what happens is that they have to have all access to all these things: technology, internet, quiet space for working. And the fact of the matter, members of the House, is that not all South African learners have access to that. Why? Because of the nature of South African inequality. Now, what makes South African inequality so unique? Let me tell you. Firstly, South African inequality is historical, and secondly, it is intersectional. What do I mean by that? So it is historical because South African inequality, when we have discussions of how South African society is an unequal one, we have to look back to policies of apartheid, policies of even colonialism, things like Bantu education, which consistently gave different life chances to white and black learners. Things like the Group Areas Act. No, I'll accept it once I'm finished with this point. Thank you. We have things like the Group Areas Act, which left people of color unable to access certain forms of employment, learning, and resources that in urban areas. And we have a very big difference between rural and urban areas within our modern setting, right? What do I mean by South Africa's inequality being intersectional? Well, I mean that it is divided on more than one basis, right? So we have inequality on the basis of class, and we have inequality on the basis of race, right? Because of apartheid policies and because of the kind of poverty we have in South Africa. Things like social mobility, being able to move from a poverty-stricken environment to maybe the middle class or beyond that, is a difficult thing to do because of a lack of resources, because of the cycle of poverty, because it's difficult to access things when you live in a rural area when most forms of employment are in urban areas. There's lots of layers to this, right? And what I'm trying to tell you, members of the House, is that inequality in and of itself in a South African context is a layered one. And in order for us to engage with that, and in order for us to address that, we need a layered response. And online learning most definitely is not a response. I'll take the POI.
Speaker, please outline the difference. What is more expensive to build, an entire school infrastructure or an online schooling infrastructure?
Thank you for that question. So in terms of economic demand, right, building an entire, a school in and of itself, yes, requires certain materials and physical things like that. However, what we need to look at going forward, we have funding programs like NSFAS, and we have programs where universities, as we know recently, have been giving out free data, have been giving out free laptop loans. And yes, this has been helpful in integrating online learning, which is a necessity in the COVID-19 pandemic. But we still see such a big disparity between the learners who have access to Wi-Fi every day and the learners who are constantly trying to use one cell phone or one computer in their household of 6 students. Right? And what we need to understand is whether it may be cheaper to supply every South African student with one laptop instead of building more schools, if that's what you're proposing. What I'm saying is right now, the access and the space of online learning is not accessible to students in South Africa. It's not one that's conducive to learning, and it's not one that we think actively addresses inequality. Thank you, speakers.
We thank the Leader of Opposition, and now I'd like to call on the Deputy Prime Minister.
All right, so if we're looking at what exactly has played out in today's debate so far, is that we're basically two opposing ideologies in terms of how to address inequality. It's very evident that no side is against inequality, or supporting it, should I say. We can see both sides are trying to implement policies, or at least ideologies, that would be conducive in fixing this inequality problem. But through my rebuttal, a lot of it will be in my positive matter. Yeah, and in terms of the Leader of Opposition's points, a lot of her points link back to apartheid and racial inequality. And, unfortunately, a lot of her points are true there. South Africa has received a large inequality through that. South Africa's inequality is particularly difficult to understand because we don't have that many billionaires and that many millionaires, and our industry isn't particularly thriving. However, the difference between the upper middle class and the lowest of the lows, incredibly shocking and incredibly concerning. Yes, in terms of dealing with that, both sides have basically concluded that throwing money at it will be the best solution. However, trying to solve the same thing over and over again, doing the same things, expecting the same results, well, that's lunacy. That is idiotic. And I wouldn't want to side with the opposition, with the side who is doing the exact same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Whereas our proposition side is offering something new, something different, something innovative. And yes, and unfortunately, their solution seems stale and rehashed. And yes, exactly. Just in terms of what inequality is, in terms of what we're going about in it, is that there's two types of equality addressing. There's equality of opportunity, and there's equality of outcome. Equality of opportunity is basically where students are given the same opportunities as they would in any other school and in any other environment. Whereas equality of outcome is where we are trying to level the playing field, absolutely, where everyone is equal. And if you want to look more in absolute equality, I'd recommend something like Solzhenitsyn or Zizek. But we'll continue into my positive matter, and we can just lay on the fact that side proposition is moving forward, and the opposing side is continually focusing on the same issues with the same solutions, and that is quite concerning. Now, onto my positive matter. Now,
the point of nation speak, do you accept it?
I will address it later in my speech. Thank you. All right, so onto my positive matter. I hate to base a lot of my speeches of pure statistics, but this will be connected to a lot of facts and statistics that I have received. Now, 38.19 million South Africans have access to the internet. And from 2020 to 2021, it was a 1.7 million increase. That's a 45% increase, in fact. And we have an internet penetration rate of 64%, one of the largest in Africa. This is showing that we have an economy that is learning and is almost ready to be integrated into an online platform, or at least an internet platform that is worth using. And these statistics exclude social media. So these are people that are just using internet searches and internet resources to search for information, which is a very positive thing. And dispels the idea that South Africans don't have a lot of access to internet, which is eye-opening. And there's over 100 million active mobile phones in South Africa, which kind of shows that people have regular access to devices. However, in terms of data usage, which is the biggest hindrance to fourth industrial revolution development, this is a problem that we do agree with. Only a madman would claim that South African data is cheap. However, from 2019 to 2020, we saw a 20% drop in data prices from 124 Rand to 99 Rand in the average data price, which is showing us that there is a decline in data prices. And I think it will be more readily available in the future. And I think that our country will be ready for that, as well as other countries around the world where their data prices are decreasing. And yes, and finally, to build on to Ahisang's POI, I would just like to say that, yes, it is true that once governments have to contribute less to public facilities such as student transport and less facilities, and they will be able to focus more on those funding those laptops and devices, which will help us in a lot of ways. So diverting certain funds when we no longer need to use so many more facilities will be able to be used on certain things. And finally, I'd just like to say that there are certain technologies that are against stealing. The current Chromebook, it requires student verification, and thankfully that is a preventative against theft and issues. I'm very excited for the rest of the debate, and I apologize to Jasmina for not answering her question. Good luck to everyone else.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. And now I'd like to call on the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Olamzi.
Greetings, Chair. Greetings to the members of the House, and greetings to the House at large. What I will first outline, I will first respond to the opening government, the Prime Minister of the opening government. And the Prime Minister gave us a starting point as opposition as to provide the fact that majority of South African schools have poor infrastructure and poor sanitation. And they also support that as saying, because these problems have been there since for 27 years, and we've been doing the same thing over and over again, there are no solutions to this. So let's do something different, because if we keep on doing the same thing and expecting different results, that is not taking us anywhere. What they are missing is that they are not addressing the issues that are leading to these issues not being solved. I mean, they're not addressing the reasons as to why these issues are still continuing after 27 years into this democracy, which is appalling and very, very interesting on our side. And the first point that I'd like to make is that without even talking about the fact that online learning can address inequality, that is further away from our thoughts as opposition. Online learning itself, it's not visible in this country, as my fellow member has already outlined the issues why it's not feasible. And we vehemently reject this idea of online learning addressing inequality. And I'm going to put points forward as to support this statement of vehemently rejecting this idea. First of all, I'm gonna talk with the issue of service delivery. I'm gonna quote the research that was made by the Amnesty International, and I quote, "The right to quality education includes having a school where learners are safe to learn and have adequate infrastructure and facilities to do so." In that report, they state that the government in 2013 mentioned that they are going to ensure that by November 2016, there will be access to sanitation, electricity, adequate skills, and build proper infrastructure by the end of November in all South African schools. And in 2020, that had not been done. I accept the point of information.
Spiro?
Speaker, can you please clarify to me that is not providing online facilities to a student in the rural area to be able to access classes regardless of them having money to go to school, and also providing it to the one in the urban area, not addressing the issue of inequalities between these two spheres. As you said, that online learning does not address it. I need clarification on that.
Thank you for that question. I will provide an answer to that question as I proceed. As I was saying, there is still no improvement in terms of infrastructure to the schools that are already there. The infrastructure is still poor, even though the government promised. They did not deliver. Some schools are still the way they are since apartheid. There has not been any improvement, no improvement at all, right? The second point is lack of basic services, plus poor infrastructure, as I mentioned, lack of textbooks, and some schools have textbooks, and most importantly, lack of security. And this lack of security in schools exacerbates the problems of vandalism and burglary. Now imagine a situation whereby you've got these sophisticated gadgets that are going to these schools and these communities. Where are they going to be? Where are they going to be? Because there's lack of security, the areas are not safe, and there's vandalism, as I said, and burglary. So it's not a safe space for those gadgets. We know the climate of South Africa, how it is. We know how these gadgets, these expensive laptops, can exacerbate these problems that already exist in our country, which is crime. The crime would be vast. Imagine a rural school that has no roof with laptops. Where are they going to be put those laptops? Without roof, you don't have desks. Students are sitting on the floor. There's no board. The teacher is standing 24/7 throughout the day, and you are saying the laptops must be there. Where is the electricity?
Speaker.
Where is the
speaker? Do you accept it?
I'm not accepting it. As I proceed, where are those devices going to be kept? Instead of addressing building, instead of renovating the schools that are already there, we are not saying the schools must start from scratch here. We are saying, look, the schools are there, renovate, improve these schools, and see if there's any change. Instead of that, they are jumping and saying, let's provide online learning. Instead of fixing this, they're saying, we can't fix these problems. Are you trying to tell me that you cannot renovate schools that have been there since the apartheid? It's very, very problematic. The third point is teacher training. I mean, you are providing these resources of technology, technological devices and internet coding and computer science. These teachers, where do they get the training to teach these learners? I mean, these teachers need proper training of online learning in order to teach these things to students, because these teachers themselves, they don't know this technology. These teachers have been teaching since 1980. These teachers are 50-year-olds, 45-year-olds and above. Some are 60-something years old. So they are not in our modern times. So how do you expect these to be able to address and solve such inequalities in the classroom? Thank you very much, Chair.
Well, we thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition, and now we move on to the second half of the debate. I'd like to call on the Member of Government to open their case.
Hello? Hello?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. Regions of employment. Now, in today's debate, members of the House, it was the side position that we'd rather that we just let things stay the same, that we should not improve or develop our educational system simply because members of the House, things are going to get too complicated for teachers to comprehend, or that there's so much crime in certain areas that we can't possibly think about elevating these areas, members of the House. So I greet the floor at large. Before anything, I first want to give a quick rebuttal and a sort of a summary of the things that have been said in today's debate, and then I'll move on to our positive matter, my positive matter. Now, under my rebuttal points, the first thing that I want to speak about is the point of inequality, right? So as side proposition, we've told the House that we understand the inequality that we see in the educational system, right? And side opposition seems to agree with us, the fact that our educational system does have a lot of inequalities, and inequalities that have been brought on by certain systems, such as apartheid in the country, right? However, members of the House, side opposition, they tell us about the problems that we have, and that the current schooling system has failed to actually address those problems that we have. So the members of the House, side opposition, actually concedes with the government that the current educational system has not worked to actually fix the inequalities that we've seen in today's society. With side proposition, we'd rather that we look at alternative ways, members of the House, alternative ways that are going to bring about development, and alternative ways that are going to address these inequalities that both sides concede to. And that is why online learning is an option in today's debate. However, we have a side opposition that concedes to that fact, but then however, and concedes to the fact that our current schooling system is not actually playing a key role in addressing these inequalities, but would rather that things still stay the same. The second point that I'd like to address is the point of access, right? So we have a side opposition that tells us that access is going to be a problem, and the fact that there's so many things that still need to be fixed. There's schools without proper infrastructure, running water. And members of the House, we understand that, we concede to that point as side proposition, right? Because we understand these inequalities and the sort of access, the limitations, members of the House. However, what we do not want as side proposition is to be dealing with a side opposition that is basically seeing these problems and then saying that because there's no running water, because there's no adequate infrastructure, that as a South African educational system, we cannot elevate, we cannot be developed, members of the House. That is what we find fault with in today's debate, right? That these problems are not mutually exclusive. Just because we start online learning, members of the House, in order to address these inequalities does not mean that now we're not going to be fixing the infrastructure in certain schools. In any case, as our proposition, we believe that by implementing online learning, we're freeing up funds, members of the House, funds that will be able to be used to fix these infrastructural problems that we see in today's society, in the schools of many schools in South Africa, right? So now I'd like to move on to my positive matter, and just to bring to the debate, members of the House, that. Sorry.
Do you accept it? There's a point of information.
No, thank you, not yet. So then what we'd like to bring as closing government, members of the House, to our extension is that what we're dealing with today is a principled debate, right? What we should be thinking about is the fact that the world is moving forward via technology. We're becoming more digitalized, members of the House, and we want to develop education, want to develop the educational system, especially as people that are aspiring to go into that sector, members of the House. And especially when we've seen the COVID-19 pandemic has rather exposed the many inequalities and exposed that our current schooling system is simply not the way to go if we want to move forward to a technologically advanced society, right, members of the House? That is why we're standing for this motion as side proposition, that we need to start thinking of long-term solutions, and which is why online learning as a platform should be that solution. And as side proposition, we're not saying that online learning is with perfection, members of the House, but rather that we see that it is the way that we should move forward in addressing some of these inequalities. So we're not saying that through online learning, these inequalities are simply going to be eradicated, but rather that we're going through that path of starting to eradicate these problems, right? So what we need to understand with the breakdown of today's debate is that. No, thank you. What we need to understand in today's debate is that we have inequalities and we have online learning. And in that proposition, we're saying that there are many characteristics that we find within online learning that are going to be crucial to addressing these inequalities, members of the House. We've looked at the issue of infrastructure. We've looked at the fact that a teacher from one city that is more equipped and more qualified would be able to teach a group of learners that is in another side of the country. So we've looked at all of these gains that we'd be able to gain from online learning and all of these lucrative opportunities, members of the House, to expose not only the teachers, but also students as well to more conducive environments and to more opportunities. And we also need to start looking at sort of the social aspect of everything, that a lot of students struggle. We understand a lot of students struggle with bullying. A lot of students struggle with social anxiety, so that we feel as though when we look at these problems and we look at online learning as a solution, online learning is going to help in fixing such solutions, members of the House, especially when we look at the certain problems that are faced within the school environment, where a lot of teachers are not, for example, incentivized to go and teach in rural areas or impoverished areas in the House. We see that online learning is going to be able to bridge that problem, to bridge that gap. And that is why we're standing for this motion in today's debate as side proposition. We're looking at the inequalities and we see favorable characteristics within online learning, and we'd like to implement online learning in order to fix these inequalities. And thus,
thank you, Speaker. I would now like to call on the government whip to close their case.
Can everyone hear me?
You're audible.
Perfect. So we think that the biggest problem within today's debate is specifically just we just miss mechanistic analysis as to how specifically just implementing online learning means that we have all these great benefits that everyone wants to talk about, right? We think that that's very unrealistic to just simply want to paint a picture that doesn't actually have links in between, right? Why do we think that is important within today's debate? Because we're not only trying to address like these really nice benefits, we're trying to actually make sure that individuals end up having the education they need, the quality of education they need. We don't ever get that kind of analysis from like the opposing side, specifically because they just list these nice benefits of online learning. Those things don't exist, right? But let's talk to you about like some other things that are integrated within our matter that we're going to be dealing with. But before that, we're just going to address this idea that like there exists a world where it's just like where it's mutually exclusive to actually get the benefits that exist from online learning, as well as just like fixing the inequalities. We think that those two things can't inherently exist at the same time, because we think one, it means you need to prioritize online learning and specifically focus all your energies on improving that system and making sure that online learning works. You never actually get to the inequalities that exist on the ground. You don't get to the infrastructure. You don't get to actually solving poverty that exists for those learners. We don't think that's like being genuine to that kind of analysis. But we tell you that even in the instance that we assumed that it would exist, we think it would exist at its poorest, and it wouldn't actually be as effective as it should be, right? But like the rest of my rebuttal will be integrated. But what are we going to be dealing with in my speech specifically? Two things. One, we're going to prove to you why we think that like online learning as a mechanism is inherently something that will never fix educational inequality. But secondly, why we think that even if we thought about it, even if we considered it, we think that it would just like exist as like a scapegoat, and it wouldn't actually be doing the work to deal with those inequalities, right? Like on to my first point. Firstly, we think that online learning wouldn't actually be fixing anything, specifically because one, first of all, we think that there exists an inherent disconnect, right? But how do we explain that? We think that online learning is just an evolution to the existing educational system, as opposed to it actually being a mechanism that would break down the actual inequalities that exist within like education currently, right? We don't think that you're actually doing anything. We think that it's just a component added on, a different way of presenting education. It isn't actually you actually fixing and going in depth into trying to actually fix back the problems that exist. We think that the problem that exists within the system don't change when you just transform the way that you are going about that education through stuff like online learning. At no point do we actually break down the systematic inequalities that have developed over the years that like the opposition earlier on were talking about, right? Why do we think that is specifically important? We think that not only is it just like an evolutionary component, we think that we don't actually fix or get to actually fixing stuff like needing quality quality teachers in the classroom. Because when you put a laptop in front of a teacher, whether or not they deliver the information, not taken, whether or not they just deliver that information, we don't think at that point we're actually dealing with stuff like the need for infrastructure. But like links to the second idea, right? The fact that it just wouldn't be doing enough in any case, because you wouldn't get to stuff like infrastructure. You'd be dealing with a whole lot of other things. You wouldn't actually be getting to the educators. You wouldn't actually be getting to the teachers. We think that clear disconnect would always be leaving us at a disadvantage. But let's tell you that even in the instance that like we considered online learning, we wouldn't think it would be an okay mechanism. But before I move on to that, I'll take you, Akisa.
Speaker, please address this very important point. Assuming that money and resources and good teaching existed, would online learning work to mitigate inequalities?
Well, we don't actually think that it would actually work we don't think it would actually work to mitigating those inequalities. And that specifically links to our second point, right? Because we think at a point at which you prioritize at a point at which you just prioritize those online learning, or you just make it a thing, right? We think that at that point, it comes with its own kind of problems. It comes in with its own kind of thing. Because the discussion in this debate ended up being about industrial revolution at some point. It became about the fourth IR and robotics. We think at that point you lost it, because you lost the most vulnerable actor in this debate. And those were the students who exist in a poverty state, who don't have great classrooms, right? At that point, you're telling us about trying to move forward into a different space where you haven't solved those very same problems. But moreover, we think that all you do is you make government look good for like making universities provide things like data, right? We don't think at that point you're actually dealing with the very core. But moreover, you use online learning as a scapegoat because you present it as a great solution, thinking that we can make it mutually exist in a society where we can actually deal with those kind of inequalities. Because at that point, you're still going to prioritize pushing the internet into people's lives, as opposed to actually dealing with the very basic problems that they have to face on a day-to-day basis. We don't think that's doing justice to anyone in this debate. We think at that point, online learning just becomes a fraction that never actually fixes the actual problems that exist within education. Those are the things that we needed to be talking about in today's debate, and not just the benefits that could exist at a point at which at a point at which we're just able to include it into the existing system.
Well, thank you very much, Tina. Just for adjudicators to note, made a mistake. Tina is actually a leader of opposition, a member of opposition, not government whip. And now I'm going to call on government whip to close their case. Akhisan?
Can you hear me?
You're audible.
Okay, great. Two very important flaws with the opposition bench. The first, from opening, is that they work under the assumption that online learning can never happen. We thoroughly disagree with this. We can refer to the session that happened a few hours ago. The second problem is the closing opposition's case, which is essentially centered around an issue of, okay, it can happen, but it won't be perfect. Panel, at a point where we are literally describing something that is either impossible or is either it can't fix everything, we're missing the point of what this debate actually ought to have been about, because it ought to have been about the principle. Is it possible for this system to be able to address inequalities that exist in the education system currently? Upon that, we can then say that we can take it as a priority and we can plan about it. Therefore, much of the cases that existed beforehand simply don't stand in this debate. What were the two clashes that were evaluated, though? Simply put, whether or not they can actually address the problems of resources. And secondly, is it, I can't believe I'm saying this, perfect? Let's deal with the is it perfect one very quickly, because essentially we get a few things from the member speech here. Firstly, that it's not necessarily going to address all issues of inequality, therefore we might as well not do it anyway. We disagree with this firmly, because one, it's not our burden to fix all of inequality. It is our burden to bridge certain gaps of inequality. So in the same way that curriculum, when curriculum is implemented, it isn't made to make every single child in the country smart. It is only made to address very, very minute, very specific problems. We think that you imposing that on the model is simply not our burden. But no, but two, it's not about fixing all systems of inequality. It's about fixing the systems of inequality that exist specifically with the nature of conventional schooling. For instance, very expensive infrastructure, communities that can't access water or electricity at all, which makes their schooling very bad. Or three, teachers who are simply disincentivized to teach in those areas to begin with. Those are systemic problems that we think we can address specifically when we literally take the geography away and put it into that kind of cyberspace. But lastly, we'd say that we simply disagree with their stance when they tell us that we simply don't have enough resources for three reasons. Firstly, we disagree because at a point where you can run and literally have systems and plans that are existing to give every single child a tablet, you've broken many barriers to entry that would have existed prior to that, as opposed to building entirely new schools from a booming child population in the country. We think that the cost-benefit analysis simply isn't working on your side, even if resources are a problem. Secondly, we said that this is not something that can be implemented instantaneously. It is a long-term vision, and these long-term visions can only exist at a point where we can agree that that the system of online schooling is something that is worthwhile in taking. We haven't gotten any arguments of why online learning isn't worthwhile in taking. All that we've gotten is that it's either impossible or imperfect. They haven't achieved their burden. I'll take a POI.
The point of information, Mulemo.
Yeah.
Please defend your principle at the point at which you say that it's a lot cheaper to do things, for example, like build things like Wi-Fi, we could replace teachers with robots simply because it's cheaper.
We don't think that that's necessarily something that we need to defend, but we're not defending cheapness as a principle. We're defending good fiscal policy, and this is good fiscal policy because it integrates the good things about conventional schooling and the good things about online learning. That's not a principle that you should be imposing on us. Then we get more practical considerations, mostly coming from the opening side, where they tell us that we lack security and people steal a lot of stuff. People steal everything. If there are laptops to steal, they will steal them. If there are no laptops to steal, then they'll steal the steal from the gates. We think that if we work around planning our public policy based on crimes that can happen, we'll never get anything done because the crime is so overwhelming in the first place. Secondly, we'd say, simply put, that the laws of supply and demand work in our favor in this, because if the majority of kids have tablets, then stealing tablets and stealing these devices ceases to be of that much value to them in the first place. Then we get the notion that what it means for supporting online learning means that we're likely to not prioritize these other institutions that need the help that they can get. We completely disagree with this premise because firstly, the government is a really big organization, ladies and gentlemen. They're more than capable of handling two problems at a time. ECD education in this country is a big problem, but it doesn't mean that no one is going to write a matric exam. We think that we can certainly split focus while also implementing something like this. But even then, we told you that on our side, we're likely to lower costs, we're likely to create much more greater landscapes for a job market that people would like, and we're creating systems of inequality that we're destroying systems of inequality that are systemic, as opposed to your side, which is defending a conventional schooling system, which your entire side has been spending time in the debate saying is bad in the first place. At a point where we only have to pick between an imperfect system versus a perfect system that can't be fixed, or a system that's impossible, we stand with our side.
Thank you, Speaker. Now I'd like to call on the opposition whip to close their case. Mulemo?
All right, am I audible?
Perfect.
All right, starting in 3, 2, 1. The problem with the case we get from the proposition is the assumption that geography exists as the inequality that exists within education. We don't think that's true for 2 reasons. First of all, even if I'm able to access the best mathematics teacher in the world, if I'm unable to grasp the very basics, that sort of knowledge means nothing to me. Second of all, if I'm unable then to relate that back to my context, it means that I'm disinterested in the context, and I'm unable to relate that context back into where I'm doing. The reason for this intro is twofold. First of all, we think that realistically, the entirety of the prop case only exists in a world wherein everything else, for example, the relatability to the context, the quality of education, and for example, things like basics don't exist. But secondly, even at the point at which we're able to get all their benefits, there's still a huge disjuncture that exists. For example, if I don't have a classroom to sit down in and get the education from, what good is a laptop going to be if I'm unable to use that laptop because I don't have the correct literacy to actively deal with that? 2 questions in this speech. First of all, is this practical? Second of all, is this in principle legitimate? Let's deal with the opening government first. And here what we're told are a few things. First of all, that currently there's a disadvantage that exists. Second of all, there are huge advantages that we're able to get. Third, that we're able to have internet and etc. etc. 4 responses here. First of all, we think that all the issues that exist are very structural and they're very systemic. What this means is it requires a structural and systemic approach that actively deals with those issues. Why is that important? We give you 2 reasons. Firstly, because we think that even if you're able to install, for example, Wi-Fi in those areas, if they don't have water, they're not going to be interested in that Wi-Fi simply because it doesn't deal with their necessary needs and their immediate needs. Second of all, we think that even in that instance then, we are unable then to ensure that these individuals fundamentally get the education that they want simply because they're unable to relate it back to context. The context is I don't have enough water, there isn't infrastructure, I wasn't taught how to use this laptop, why then would I be interested in actively engaging that sort of subject matter? That's the thing that we're trying to fix under our side. The centralization of resources, which mean that it's actively impractical for us to actively make sure that they are able to get certain things. Second thing we'd say, that it's just not true, right? We don't think that there's enough adequate resources. Why? Because first of all, we think that the software that's required and the hardware that's required is oftentimes inaccessible to these individuals, simply because the basics that they had to acquire just wasn't acquired when they were young. Secondly, we think that there are more pressing issues that they have to deal with. For example, they don't have food, they don't have infrastructure, they don't have water. All those things are more immediate and therefore they're more incentivized to deal with those issues first as opposed to things like Wi-Fi. If you can't deal with those iniquities and those inherent inequalities, you can't talk about things like geography. Fourth, we think that realistically, if they can't relate to the context, they're unable then to find value in the content and the subject matter. That's important because we think that if you're unable to find value within that subject matter, even if geography is something that's removed, the barrier that exists between the two of you still exists. So I don't find value in the subject, I'm not going to engage the subject, I get bored with the subject, I don't take the subject further. That's the inequality that you had to fix as opposed to things like them actively getting that sort of resource. Second argument we get... Not now. Second argument we get here is to say that we're able to get a multiplicity of benefits. So we're able to, for example, ensure that we have a cost-benefit analysis. So it's more expensive to build schools as opposed to Wi-Fi. We have 3 responses here. First of all, the context within rural South Africa looks like child-headed families, wherein as a child, you're forced to take care of your family or to take care of things or of your family or your siblings. All those things still exist, even if you have a laptop. So we think that those barriers to entry still exist, even though you have access to good teachers. Second of all, we think that you just need the basics. So even if you do have that laptop, you're still unable to access the full functionality of that laptop because you're not given the basics simply because of the extent to which you're able to actively place emphasis on geography. If you're able to place emphasis on geography, you're unable to fix the basics. The basics look like putting a child in a classroom and teaching them how to use that laptop. If you don't have the classroom to begin with, like most schools in the Eastern Cape, like most schools in Limpopo, you're unable to fix those issues. Thirdly, we think that education does not exist in a vacuum. So you don't go to class because you want to listen and get information. education as a whole is a very emotional process. So it's an active exchange between the teacher and the learner. If that teacher is someone that lives very far away from you, you're less likely to be engaged within that sort of context, and you're unable then to engage that sort of context with the fullest extent, and you become disincentivized to that issue. Comparatively, why do we think that we're the side that wins this clash? And this is where the matter that Tina gives you become explicitly important. We told you three things that Akhisan completely scapegoated. First of all, there's an inherent disconnect that exists between the system and the inequality and the thing that online learning is trying to do. Online learning deals with the geography, the inherent educational inequality.
Do you take it?
I'll take it now. I'll take it in 2 seconds. The inherent inequality that we're talking of is not something, for example, like the inherent inequality that we're talking of is not something like geography. The inherent inequality is the concentration of resources, which mean that you're unable to have things like a classroom, which means that you don't have things like water, which actively makes your education experience a lot more effective. Before I move on, I'll take a POI.
Spiwo?
The logic of your case is essentially there are no resources and children live in very dire situations. Therefore, should we never have online learning ever?
No, right? That isn't our chat. Our chat is to say, fix the basics first. Give them a classroom, give them water, ensure that they have quality teachers before you move on with online education. Because online education assumes that that's what you need in order to bridge all these other things that I've talked about, which are the fundamental precipices in order for us to move on directly. And this deals with the bulk of the case we get from Mahisang, the principle case. Here's why we think that we don't value this principle. There are two reasons. First of all, the principle is predicated on the fact that it's effective. If we're able to prove to you that as a rural child, you're not able to access those resources, then the principle becomes very, very inefficient. But secondly, on the comparative, we think that under our world, when we're able to show you that things like online education doesn't deal with the systemic issues, the active inequities that exist, we win. And the reason we win is because of the disjunction that exists, because we're unable to fix the issue, and because we scapegoat the issue, very proud to oppose.
Thank you. So much passion. Well, we thank the opposition whip. We've come to the closure of the end of that formal facet of the debate. I'm going to ask our technical team to just send our adjudicators to their breakaway room so they can deliberate. And now I'm opening this platform up for more general engagement. Let me stop sharing so that I can get to see who's here. I see Ngcebo and Nonku are still here. If someone could just send them to their breakaway room. Great. Thanks a lot, everyone. That was quite a heated debate. I just want to get a sense from the people who are in the audience, the people who are watching the debate. What was your feel? What was your experience? What are your thoughts? Just raise your hand and I'll recognize you. Okay, Tabiso.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
I'd just like to say that was a great debate. I would say that both sides had very, very good arguments. I would say the webs really brought it home for both groups. But I would say I have to agree more with the opposition because they gave more, I would say they gave more supporting evidence of why at this stage in our country, there are things that we have to fix before we can try to implement online learning. So I would have to agree more with the opposition, in my opinion.
Thanks a lot, Tabiso. Wandile.
Molweni, how are you guys?
All good.
Zolani, can you hear me?
Yes, you're audible. We're just waiting on you to make your point.
Sorry, my things are not cooperating with me. And I was just saying, look, some very good, interesting things that were raised in this debate. I think I've learned a lot personally as well. So well done on them. I think overall a good debate for us to have with ourselves as well, especially as we look at the comment that Christian made about equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. And that one comment that that Arisang made about just because we can't address all inequality, does that mean we shouldn't address it where we are able to? So that was a very good, I think from my side, it was a very quality debate. We could have definitely taken this.
Great. Thanks, Wandile. I'm not sure if you got cut or you were done, but Daniel?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I must say that what an informing debate it was, especially because I think all the participants really made me to go back and rethink my vision. 2030 vision, and that is simply because the mentioning of online learning that is urgent, and at the same time not considering the infrastructure, and when Molemo mentioned that will it be possible to implement online learning while we still have infrastructure that are not even renovated. So that was a sort of maybe sometimes we would you would be in a particular position, or maybe let's say in Cape Town, and you would think that it is all possible and everyone in the country can do it. But honestly speaking, it made me think that it might not be possible to everyone, because you can have that thing of saying online learning is possible, but at the same time you find that it does not meet the interest of the students simply because the infrastructure is bad. When you look at the conditions of most of learners, their backgrounds, where they are, some do not have water, it is true, and you introducing online learning, it is not their best interest. And I feel like they won't be able to study in those environments or those conditions. So rather take them back to school.
Daniel, I'm going to have to cut you there. Sorry, Daniel. I'm just conscious of our time, and I want to give everyone an opportunity to speak. But I think I get the essence of what you were sharing about how, the debate has broadened your perspective when it comes to the way in which you look at, firstly, your Vision 2030 speech, which you'll be doing on Sunday, but also just your own conception of some of the nuances and the problems that compound whether or not online learning will address the inequalities in our education. Thanks for that insight. And Nonkululeko?
Hi, everyone. Hi.
We can hear you, Nonkululeko. Just proceed.
Oh, okay. Thank you. It was a very informative debate for both sides. The rebuttals were very good. No stone was left unturned. But I would just like to go with the proposition team. I feel like their points were very valid. And I think we underestimate the power of action, actually. So I think we should go ahead with the online learning. Because I didn't know that I was going to be able to do 5 months, 6 months of online learning in university level, but I did it. So I feel like if we do stuff, then we can actually get stuff done. So yes.
So basically, if Nonkululeko did it, then everyone can did it, right? Thanks a lot for that, Nonkululeko. I'm going to come to you, Matabo Tladi.
Hi, good evening, Chair. Good evening to the House. Yeah, this is very much a technical response on the part of opposition. I would have really, because what proposition did, if I'm getting the sides correct here, was arguing the fact that the assumption is that it could never, ever happen, not on any plane could online learning happen. And if opposition had to, for me at least, you would find yourself less in a corner if you had defined the extent of your opposition. So you're opposing the idea that this could happen. You're opposing the fact that the extent with which online learning could happen, because now it almost felt like it can happen or it can't happen, as though there isn't a middle ground of a hybrid conversation, as though the presence of online learning means the eradication of the current learning system. So a blended method was not engaged, and I think that's where the real clash is at. The phasing of, is there phasing? Is there blending? How does it happen? Where does it happen? Who gets advantaged? Who gets disadvantaged? But overall, the fire and the overall engagement for me was exciting. Atasang, well done. Mulimo, well done. Sibulele, well done. I mean, everyone really did come through and pulled out the punches.
Thanks a lot for that, Matabo. I guess this is one of the tricky things about arguing on principles, right? Because then if it's just a principle argument, we could go on as far as we want to go. And I think that's the benefit of being in the fore of a principle debate, because then you can just extend and remove all limitations without actually being called to it. I'd like to call on Nothando Mafu.
Hello.
Hi, Nothando, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I wasn't gonna say much of everyone said something so deep as a response, and I guess I just wanted to show appreciation for the whole debate, in the sense that multiple things can be true at the same time. So in some spaces, we mustn't ignore, that there are schools that are advanced and don't have infrastructure issues where technology can start being implemented. And then other schools where that's not necessarily something that should be happening yet, because there's other issues that need to be solved first or are more pressing as opposed to becoming technological. But I was just gonna show an appreciation for the multiple viewpoints that I think are all very, very valid and all very true at the same time, because we're living in such a complex country. Chisang mentioned there's many things, we just need to somehow bridge wherever we can. And I think that's the value of having a fellowship with so many different people who come with different perspectives, because all of us have specific passions or specific things that we want to tackle specifically. And that's the beauty in this, the fact that all of us have a thing that I think that we are passionate about. And in all of us doing or tackling those specific issues, little by little, we can affect the bigger picture. Yep.
Thanks a lot for that, Nothando Mafu. I've been notified that our adjudicators are done and would like to come back. So if someone in the technical team could just help out with bringing them back into this room. But while we wait for them, Boitoko, your hand has been up. Let's see how precise you can be.
Okay. Thank you so much. I actually appreciate all the arguments that are brought forward. And the arguments indeed show us that there's still a delicate dance between knowing where the role of the human comes in, because before we can even start talking about the learner learning, we need to talk about the environment in which they are. We need to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Are the needs addressed at the bottom level before the learner can learn? And another aspect that comes to is the issue of accessibility. I think both arguments were really focused on, they hardly touched on looking at learners who have special needs. How is this move going to affect them? Is this move even looking at their needs at this point in time? And another thing that I picked up throughout the day and even now is that the move to online learning or to hybrid learning, we were really thrown into it. We have not yet sat down and thought about the whole aspect the whole thing as an aspect. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to put to the table, more especially the aspect of special needs learners.
Thanks a lot for that, Boitsoko. Great, our adjudicators are back, and we'll give it to you now to just take about 5 minutes to give us some feedback.
I feel like I should start a timer as well, Zolani, timer. So that I'm not taking up all the time. Firstly, I just want to say a very big thank you to both sides, government and opposition. You really presented coherent arguments. I think your arguments were well structured. And you really gave us some insight into what each side prepared for. I think we can tell that, you know, both sides have prepared very well for the debate. And I think, you know, most of our feedback, Ngcebo can definitely add on. Most of our feedback is just geared at making you better debaters. You know, the debating bug, you know, has had Ngcebo and I for most of our lives. So everything that we're coming with, even if it is, you know, not necessarily all the way positive, I'm hoping will be something that you can at least take away from. So as I've said, you know, coherent arguments, very well made. But I think just a general note for both sides is, you know, really don't be afraid to drill down into what your case is actually about. I think my first point for that goes to the government. You know, you really, as the government opening the debate, you have the liberty to set the parameters for what it is that you're really saying. I really think that, I think it's Agisang really pulled the government debate at the end to, you know, letting us know, actually, this is what our case is about as the government. And I think, you know, your prime minister, your deputy prime minister as opening, you know, really could have capitalized on that and setting out, you know, what do you mean by inequality? And I think you had very good points about what you were classifying as an inequality, which I understood to be sort of the access part, you know, making sure that all learners have access to quality education. Whereas, you know, the opposition side, it was more, yes, that's a great aim, but the structural inequalities overarch that aim to have access to quality education, and that needs to be taken into account in a broader context. So I think definitely spend more time making that argument very, very clear, so that there's no debate around what you mean by equality, no debate around what you mean about schools and technology, and you're debating on very clear points. Yeah, and I think that's the crux of the feedback is, you know, make the points. Don't be afraid to pull on, you know, things that are happening in recent examples. How does UCT Online School show us the example of this debate? How has the COVID experience shown us, you know, about what works and what doesn't about online learning? And I think that was really where, you know, you could have made your points. But I think overall, very good debate. Ngcebo?
Thank you so much, Nonkululeko. And I'd also like to just thank you all for the opportunity. And it was really great listening to you guys. You presented your arguments very well. You are well researched, and you can see how hard you all worked and the effort that you put in. So congratulations to everyone. And thank you to Zolani as well for inviting Nonkululeko and I. And thank you for just this opportunity. And in terms of feedback, Zolani asked us to be, you know, very much brief, but I think you guys deserve a very much more in-depth feedback, because you are really great and you really put a lot of effort into it. And so please forgive us if we go beyond 5 minutes. Firstly, I'd say the opening government, your definition was, while it could have been better, you could have increased your parameters a bit more, whereas you didn't really define the topic well. And secondly, your arguments didn't flow. Both the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister went into different directions, and you didn't really have a stand that was uniform, and it shows that maybe your prep time wasn't a lot, or that you didn't really prep properly. And then also the rebuttals when the arguments were moving between the different houses were very weak. It was basically just stating what the other side said, and you didn't really break down that argument. You know, you've had the benefit, you can forgive the prime minister, he hasn't heard anything, but all the others, you were sitting and listening to the arguments, maybe you were more stressed about your presentation, but you've got a good 2 minutes to break that other side's argument and tear it apart. And I felt that was a bit short. And secondly, which is something that most speakers struggled with, you didn't use your time. Which is why I'm going to be hard on you on the rebuttal. I can forgive you if you didn't rebuttal and you ran out of time, but many of you stopped at 6 minutes. And so you still had a minute that you could have literally broken down the other side's argument. And so therefore, going forward, I don't know where Zolani was there. What was the minute? Was it 7 minutes or 6 minutes?
No, sorry, shame, Ngcebo. You're thinking of usual debate time. It was 6 minutes this time around. So that's why they stopped at that time.
Oh, okay. Please forgive me. So you did use your minutes. Okay, because I was like, why are you not using your extra minutes? Okay, it's okay. So my apologies for that. And then thirdly, but in future, use your time and structure, set time for rebuttal, set time for your arguments, and set time for your closing as well. And you know, usually in debating, that last 60 seconds is very important, that even if anyone forgot what you were talking about, summarize your key point and end with those last words in their minds. Like, you know, we even used to say stuff, and for this reason, we believe that this motion should fall. And for this reason, we believe that A, B, C, and D, and then you end, you know, end on a strong point. Leave the panel or the adjudicators or the other side with your points lingering in their heads. And then secondly, what I liked was there were some POIs, some were great and some were poor. So thank you for bringing those POIs. Some speakers I shall not mention did not even ask any POIs. So please make sure that you do ask a POI. It shows that you are engaged in the debate. It shows that you are understanding the clash. It shows you are understanding the issues. But at the same time, ask POIs strategically. Some of you just asked POIs and honestly, they didn't move the debate forward. Ask a POI to distract the speaker, to break the speaker's arguments down. Ask a POI to put your point across. Ask a POI to, you know, move the debate forward. Don't just ask a POI for the sake of asking a POI. So sometimes you are penalized for asking a POI that doesn't take the debate anyway, but at the same time, show that you are engaged in the debate and you are focused in the debate. And I think there was great passion, there was great involvement. You guys understood the issues, you understood the socio-economic issues facing South Africa, and you also presented your arguments very well, even on this digital platform as today. So that is very commendable to you guys. And I wish you all the best and congratulations for the excellent debate. And I think Nonkululeko and I are very proud of you all. You all put in your best and we wish you guys all the best. Thank you very much.
Great stuff. Thanks a lot, Ngcebo and Nonku. I think everyone could tell that Ngcebo is that judge that has no time for being kind, and that judge that will tell you like it is. For anyone's info, Ngcebo actually adjudicated me while I was in high school, and very much like you, he gave it like it was. So you can almost expect that. But I think really, as we're summing up and closing this, sorry for running over time, candidate fellows, you've put in a lot of work into the debate. And I think I've got no doubt that the future of the education system in South Africa is definitely in good hands, because one of the key issues that we've been seeing lacking is a kind of leadership that is able to engage issues with nuance, right? A kind of leadership that is able to take the kind of criticism or constructive criticism that you're getting through the adjudicators. And I think that's a key element of your development as aspiring educational leaders, expert teachers, and social entrepreneurs. So really all the best, and thank you so much for the energy that you've put into today's debate. Have a good night.